I am Evelyn Hayes, a 75-year-old widow who has devoted her life to her family, especially her only son, Dylan. Since the sudden death of my husband a few years ago, I have been in dire straits. Hospital bills and funeral expenses forced me to sell the small house where we had shared many seasons of sunshine and rain for decades. I believed that moving in with Dylan and his wife, Sophia, would be a new beginning, a refuge where I could find some warmth in my old age. But reality has coldly overturned that hope. From the very beginning, I felt the indifference seeping in like frost, and that first moment, like a wordless slap, opened the gates of hell I had never imagined. Dylan's house is on Elm Street in Willow Creek, Ohio, a bungalow with a grassy backyard and windows that let in morning sunlight. In 2025, everything here is so modern, with voice-controlled smart devices and luxurious interiors, that I feel out of place. I woke up early that morning and prepared a simple, heartwarming breakfast, the only way I could think of to express my gratitude for being taken in. The faint aroma of coffee wafted from the automatic coffee maker, and the occasional sound of cars from the street created a false sense of peace. I stood in the corner of the kitchen, my hands shaking as I lifted a plate of golden eggs, topped with sautéed vegetables, a dish I had learned to cook when I was young. It was the first breakfast I had served in my son's kitchen since moving in. I hoped that that little thing would be the thread that would tie me back to this family, that I would still be a part of it. But the giggles that echoed from the living room were like cold knives. Sophia sat cross-legged on the expensive leather sofa, her blonde hair hanging loose and haughty, the air of a powerful young woman. Dylan sat next to her, his eyes glued to his phone, not bothering to look up. The air in the house was thick, like a thick fog that covered everything. "Mom, it took you an hour just to fry a few eggs?" Sophia's voice echoed in, cold as ice, carrying a sarcastic tone that made my heart clench. I bit my lower lip, trying to keep my breathing calm, but the wrinkles on my forehead seemed to deepen. "I just want everything to be delicious for you and Dylan, Sophia," I replied, trying to keep my voice light despite the indescribable feeling of choking up inside me. I remembered the days when Dylan was little, running into the kitchen, picking up bread and praising the chicken soup his mother made. Now, my son has become a successful engineer, living in comfort and modernity, seemingly forgetting the image of his mother who silently sacrificed everything for him. Sophia smiled faintly, a cold smile that carried no warmth. "Delicious? Do you think Dylan cares what you cook? He's used to Michelin-starred cuisine, Mom. Your omelets," she paused, shrugging slightly, "are just breakfast for show." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. My face was burning with shame. Dylan remained silent, no words to help, no sympathetic glances. He just continued to stare at his phone, as if my presence was not worth worrying about. I suddenly felt invisible, small in my own home. I clenched my teeth, fighting back the tears that were welling up. "Come on, Sophia, you're trying," Dylan finally said, but his voice was flat and weak, as if he was just saying it. He didn't look at me, didn't even look up, like a knife silently cutting into my heart. Sophia pretended to cough, then laughed, her tone of sarcasm continuing. "Your kindness is sometimes a little old-fashioned, mother-in-law. It's the 21st century. Who needs handmade things like that anymore?" She walked over to the dining table, staring intently at the plate of eggs I had brought out. "Oh, could you take this plate away for me? It doesn't match our Tiffany dinnerware." I looked down at the plate of eggs, then glanced at the shiny silver-rimmed white porcelain dishes that sparkled under the light. A bitter taste rose in my throat. I, Evelyn Hayes, the office secretary for 28 years, saving every penny to send Dylan to school, was now being humiliated by my own daughter-in-law over a simple meal. I had to swallow my tears. I couldn't cry, not in front of them. I had the last shred of dignity left. Quietly, I picked up my plate and turned to walk toward the sink. I'm sorry, I whispered, not sure if they heard. The feeling of being humiliated, of being rejected in the very house that had hoped to be a peaceful place, weighed down on my heart like a stone. The room seemed to sway. Sophia's laughter echoed like 1,000 needles piercing my skin. I thought of the old days, Dylan wrapping his arms around me, calling Mom in a voice as sweet as honey. But the harsh reality pulled me back. That moment, the first slap that came not from the hand, but from the look, the words, the silence, was etched into my mind. And perhaps it touched some deep part of me that had been dormant for so long. I washed the dishes under the tap, my hands shaking, my tears silently mixing with the warm water. Outside, laughter and voices continued to buzz, as if I had never existed. I wiped my hands and returned to the small room at the end of the house, where there was only a single bed and a few old things from my old life. Sitting on the bed, I covered my face, trying to calm down. How could life be so cruel? I gave up my dream of becoming a teacher to work in an office so that Dylan could have the means to study. Now, my son is successful and rich, but his wife sees me as a parasite, as an outdated item. I sighed, looking out the window, where the early morning sunlight was seeping into the room. Maybe I need time to get used to it all. But deep down, I know the uneasiness is growing. Sophia is not only cold, but seems to be gradually pushing me out of their lives. And Dylan, why is he silent? Why did he leave me alone in this vast distance? I wonder, does he remember the years I sacrificed everything for him? I spent the rest of the morning avoiding them, quietly packing up my things. Each item was a memory, a picture of my late husband smiling kindly, a hand-knitted scarf my mother had once knitted. They were the only remnants of a life now lost in this strange house. I heard Sophia on the phone, her voice full of glee as she boasted about her new purchase. Dylan had left for work, without a word of goodbye. I felt like an invisible shadow passing through another life. That slap, not just a word, was the beginning of a long series of unforeseen injuries. But I would not collapse. I needed time to see more clearly, and perhaps that moment, would change me forever. That night, after retreating to my quiet room, I lay on my single bed in my small corner, the cold moonlight streaming through the thin, silk-like window. That room, a quiet corner in the house that was too big, contained only a few old things I had brought with me from my old life. A chipped wooden cabinet, a few books that had faded over the years, and a photo of my husband, his face smiling gently, neatly placed on the bedside table. All of these things created a world of complete contrast to the rest of the house, which was filled with luxury, modern furniture, dazzling crystal chandeliers, and abstract paintings that Sophia often boasted of having collected from famous galleries. The laughter from the living room drifted in, making me curl up as if to hide from the pain that was throbbing in my chest. Dylan and Sophia were watching a comedy, I guessed, from the constant high-pitched laughter. I could hear Sophia's voice clearly. What a country bumpkin who knows nothing about fashion. Then Dylan's forced laugh, as if he was trying to join in, to keep the mood light. They were probably talking about me, about the dress I was wearing today, an old thing from a time when there was no such thing as luxury. Yesterday, things were even more brutal. Sophia bluntly asked me to contribute to the living expenses, as if I were a tenant and not a mother-in-law. We sat around the dinner table, which was filled with delivered steaks, not anything I had ever cooked by hand. You know, Dylan and I have a lot to worry about. You have a pension, right? She said, her voice as casual as if she were talking about the weather. We can't support you forever. Those words stabbed me like a knife. My meager pension barely covered my basic needs after selling our old house to pay off the debts that had arisen after my husband's sudden death. I had believed that I would be loved and cared for in my old age, just as Dylan had promised when he asked me to move in with him. Instead, I had become a burden, an obstacle in the perfect picture of the lavish life they were building. I looked at Sophia, my throat tight, unable to form words. But you don't have any other home to live in, I whispered, my voice trembling like the wind hitting the glass. She shrugged, a gesture that was frighteningly familiar, filled with deep contempt. That's your problem, not ours. You should have taken care of yourself a long time ago. And Dylan, the son I had raised with my blood and tears, was silent. Not a word of defense, not a glance daring to meet. He was silent as if he agreed, as if the years I had spent supporting the family after my husband's death had become meaningless. I felt abandoned in the desert, silent and naked. The person I had loved to the core now turned away as if he had never known that sacrifice. I clearly remembered the long days of loneliness after my husband's death. I still tried to live neatly, not complaining, not bothering Dylan with even a word. It was he who called, his voice warm. "Don't worry, Mom. Come back here with me. You don't have to worry about anything. Just consider this your home." But now, I was like a bird trapped in a gilded cage. My wings were weak, my heart was torn, and the door was wide open as if to say, "If you still have the strength, then fly away." I closed my eyes, trying to push away those cruel images, but they came back like a wave without shore. I remembered Mrs. Beatrice, my old neighbor in the old neighborhood. She used to say through the backyard fence, "Evelyn, your son has his own family now. You have to learn to live for yourself." At that time, I just smiled lightly, not thinking much. But now, every word she said seemed to hit my heart. I had trusted too much in family love, too much in the motherly love that I considered immortal. I had traded my dream of becoming a teacher, even sold my souvenir bracelet to pay Dylan's tuition, just hoping he would have a future. And now he had betrayed me, not with words, but with that cruel silence. I turned over, buried my face in the pillow. A sob escaped, stuck in my throat. I felt stupid, weak, like a withered leaf blown by the wind in the cold autumn. But in the depths of my despair, a thin spark flickered. Among the tears, among the pain, it wasn't hope, but something else: repressed anger, mounting hurt, and the realization that I couldn't keep on being a stale woman, silently accepting being pushed to the margins of life. I had to take action, even if it was small steps. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes, but tried to keep my composure. I avoided Sophia, only nodding briefly to Dylan as he got ready for work. He glanced at me, his eyes slightly confused, but didn't ask anything. "I'm going to work, Mom," he said, then turned away quickly. I stayed home with Sophia, who was busy with her online sales and the trendy clothes she often showed off online. She didn't say a word to me all morning, only glancing at me as I cleaned the kitchen. I could feel it. An invisible wall was slowly building up, cutting me off from the rest of the world. In the afternoon, I decided to go out for a walk to get some fresh air. Willow Creek is a peaceful little town, with shady trees lining the streets and small cafes nestled along the sidewalks. I sat on a bench in the park near my house, quietly watching the children play. They reminded me of Dylan when I was little, the boy who used to run around the yard, calling me Super Mom because I always knew how to fix broken toys or cure a sudden fever. Tears rolled down again, but this time I wiped them away quickly. I didn't allow myself to dwell on the past. When I returned home, Sophia's voice rang out from the living room, clear and sharp on the phone. "My mother-in-law? Yes, she's staying with me, but she has to pay. Who would stay for free?" The loud laughter was like rubbing salt into a still bleeding wound. I stopped at the door, trembling. Quietly, I retreated to my room and closed the door. My heart was pounding, like a storm was coming. I could feel it. The hurt was piling up, smoldering like a fire under the ashes. I knew it was time to do something. Maybe call Beatrice for advice. Maybe face Dylan just once, just to get my feelings out. I lay down, eyes wide open in the darkness. The laughter from the living room rang out again, as if plunging me deeper into loneliness. But that fire was still burning, smoldering, aching, waiting to flare up like a strong wind that no one could stop. A few days after the initial trauma, the atmosphere in that house was still as tense as a string about to snap. I began to see things differently, more alert, no longer waiting for a little warmth from Dylan or Sophia like before. The spacious living room, the shiny leather sofa, and the glass coffee table reflecting the modern LED lights, all of it only emphasized the cold barrenness of this place. To me, it was not a home, but a stage for rare conversations, always tinged with contempt. I sat curled up in an armchair in the corner of the room, pretending to read an old history book, a souvenir from the old house. But my ears were straining to hear Sophia's phone call. She was talking to her friend on speakerphone, her voice cheerful and triumphant, as if she were showing off a victory. I just bought the latest Louis Vuitton, Jenny, a real city girl. Dylan said to buy it, he'll pay. Sophia giggled, her laughter echoing through the air like a knife cutting into my heart. By the way, I just hired my mother-in-law as a housekeeper and chef. Her work is included in the rent and living expenses. What a bargain! My heart clenched. Rent? Living expenses? What they called contribution was actually just a way for them to hire me as a servant in their own son's house. A jolt of electricity ran down my spine, hot and stinging. Those words were not just a joke, they were naked evidence of deliberate exploitation. I was no longer a respected mother, but a tool to be exploited to the point of exhaustion. That night, after Sophia and Dylan had retreated to their bedroom, I sat alone in the darkness of the living room, the lights dim and the smell of cold coffee lingering. I decided to reopen my bank account, the one Dylan had always said was too much trouble for my mother to manage. I turned on the tablet he'd lent me, entered my own password, and waited for the screen to light up. A list of transactions appeared, a steady stream of transfers. $2,000 to Sophie's Boutique, a fashion store Sophia had bragged about online. Another $1,500 to a luxury brand downtown. I remembered Dylan saying that Sophia was helping me with my finances because I was old and forgetful. It was clear now she wasn't helping. She was draining me. That money, my meager pension, the last of the money left after selling my house, had been my lifeline. Now it was disappearing. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding in the eerily quiet air. I sat there, the light of my screen reflecting off my face in the mirror, a woman betrayed to the core. Sophia, with her sweet exterior, silky hair, and soft voice, was in fact a bottomless glutton. And Dylan? Did he know? Or was he also turning away from me in cowardly silence? I closed my laptop, got up, and went back to my room, but sleep did not come that night. I tossed and turned in the dark, thinking about everything that had happened since arriving, the teasing at meals, the demands for contributions, and now the outright theft. I could not believe that my own son had let things get this far. The next day, I decided to cook a special dinner, beef stew with vegetables and toast, Dylan's favorite dish as a child. I wanted to create an occasion for us to sit down, to ask directly about the money. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, the flour on my sleeves, the scent of spices filling the house. These were the things that made me feel alive. Even though the kitchen had been replaced with modern appliances, I still chose to cook by hand to retain the old flavors. When Dylan came home, exhausted from a long day at work, I put the food on the table and tried to smile, a weak smile, full of fragile hope. Dylan, try this. Mom made it for you, I said, my voice trembling. He looked at the food, then at me, his eyes blank, no trace of warmth. I'm tired, Mom. I just want to take a shower and rest, he said, as if the food were a trivial problem. Sophia walked past from the living room, glanced at the food, and gave me a sarcastic glance. Mom, I told you Dylan doesn't like these classics. He only eats sushi or pizza now. My heart broke. I looked at Dylan, expecting a rebuttal, a look of sympathy, but there was none. He turned and walked upstairs. His silence was a deadly blow. I had to hold on to the edge of the table to steady myself. Sophia continued, her voice honeyed but cold and emotionless. Don't be sad, Mom. Everyone is busy these days. Let me order a pizza. She pulled out her phone and pressed the order without asking a word. I silently gathered up the plates of food that I had poured all my memories, love, and hope into, and dumped them in the trash. Tears rolled down my face. It wasn't just the food that was thrown away. It was my feelings, my last attempt to heal. I tossed and turned all night. I remembered every detail, the time Sophia threw away the scarf my mother had knitted, or the old photo of my husband, all discarded like trash. This is too old. Why do you keep it? She said like a pair of scissors, cutting through my past without blinking. Before, I thought it was carelessness, but now I understood. It was intentional. It was manipulation. It was her way of erasing me from this house, bit by bit. I jumped up and walked to the window. The moonlight shone down on the backyard, peaceful to the point of fear. A fire burned inside me, burning away all my weakness, all my fear. I couldn't take it anymore. I wouldn't let them trample on my dignity without consequences. The weak Evelyn of yesterday was dead. Now I would be the one to pay back every wound they had inflicted, starting with Sophia, who had ripped my soul out with lies, and then Dylan, the son who had betrayed me with his cold silence. I clenched my fists in the moonlight. They would pay for every harsh word, every contemptuous look. The fire inside me would not go out until justice was returned to my name. The next morning, I woke up with a vague plan. I would not act rashly. I could not show my emotions. I would quietly observe, gather evidence. When Sophia went out shopping, a habit that never changed, I crept into their office and flipped through the pile of papers on their desks. The receipts, with the amounts of the purchases, eerily matching the withdrawals. I took out my old phone and took pictures of each one. Hide them deep in my photo library. When Dylan came home late, I still had the same smile, still played the resigned mother, but my eyes were different, colder, more determined. I knew this was just the beginning, and I, the fire, would burn away the lies they had built. In the following days, I continued to live in the shell of a frail old woman, but inside, a quiet transformation had begun. Every morning, I woke up earlier than usual, made coffee myself, stood alone in the small kitchen, looked out at the garden as if enjoying the peace, but in fact was quietly observing Sophia's every move. She had assumed control of every corner of this house, from the splendid living room with its cold abstract paintings hanging on the walls, to the study, where Dylan kept his laptop and the stacks of financial papers that he probably no longer had full control of. I sat in the living room, holding an old novel borrowed from the library, a story about seemingly weak but surprisingly resilient women. My eyes scanned the pages, but my ears were glued to Sophia's video call. She laughed and talked naturally, her tone full of triumph, her words insolent as if I were an inanimate object in the room. Oh my God, my mother-in-law is a burden, old, senile, and still likes to act luxurious. I have to find a way to get more money from her. Dylan is so naive, obedient to me like a puppy. Sophia sneered, her voice as sharp as a knife cutting into my heart. She thinks I'm an angel. Just wait, I'll wring her dry like a rag. My fingers clenched the book until they turned white. My throat was dry. My heart was twisted with disgust. Before my eyes was no longer the smiling daughter-in-law, her smooth skin adorned with expensive cosmetics, but a sophisticated predator, good at hiding her claws under a sweet shell. She not only exploited my money, but also deliberately crushed me mentally, making me feel like a useless relic in the modern world. With her perfect appearance, she charmed Dylan and everyone else, creating the image of a good wife, a model daughter-in-law. But through the cracks of the book, I only saw a dangerous enemy, a venomous snake coiled waiting for the opportunity to strike. I said nothing, just silently took in every word. That afternoon, while Sophia was busy in her office, a room designed like a fashion studio, bright and luxurious, I decided to act. When she went to order from her usual coffee shop, I quietly went into the kitchen under the guise of cleaning up, but in reality, to watch how she handled my things. Another afternoon in the small laundry room at the back of the house, where the washing machine hummed like a sigh, I carefully hand-washed Dylan's old jacket, a gift I had given him on his 25th birthday. The color was deep blue, the wool was warm. Every stitch was wrapped in a mother's love. My hands soaked in the warm water, my mind wandering back to the days when Dylan was a cute boy, grateful for every little thing. Sophia walked by, her cold eyes stopping at where I was sitting. "What are you doing?" Her voice was like a knife cutting through the silence. "Dylan's clothes are branded, not something you can wash by hand. Don't you know how to use a high-end washer and dryer?" Without waiting for me to react, she grabbed the shirt and threw it straight into the washing machine like it was trash, water splashing everywhere. "Outdated," she muttered, then pressed the button hard as if to vent her anger. The shirt spun in the washing machine. Every thread of wool seemed to be torn apart. I watched, my heart aching. It wasn't just a shirt. It was evidence of love, of the nights I spent sewing to save money, of the mornings Dylan wore it with a childish smile. Sophia was cleaning every trace of me from my son's life, bit by bit, as if I were a stain that needed to be washed away. I stood still, looking at the ruined shirt, then watching Sophia turn away with a triumphant smile. Her blonde hair was bouncing as if she had just won a battle. I did not shed tears, did not complain. I would not shed tears. I would just silently engrave everything, every harsh word, every cruel act, like a scar that would never heal. I would make her pay, not with tears or begging, but with the patience of someone pushed to the limit. I continued with the laundry, my hands shaking, but my mind clear. That evening, when Dylan came home, he did not notice the shirt had been transformed, busy, indifferent. He just said goodbye and quietly went up to his room. Sophia sat alone at the dining table, leisurely enjoying her organic salad like a classy lady, glancing at me coldly. "You should learn to adapt, because if you keep holding on to old things, you will only make yourself miserable." Her voice was sweet as sugar but hollow as stone. I nodded, pretending to comply, but inside, the fire of anger burned brighter than ever. From that day on, I began to pay attention to her every move, from the kitchen to the living room, from the hallway to the balcony. The next morning, while she was putting on makeup in front of the large mirror, I accidentally heard another call. "Dylan is too easy. He loves me blindly. As for that old woman, I will make her leave after emptying the account. Yesterday, I withdrew a few hundred more to buy a new necklace. She doesn't know anything." Every word was like a needle stabbing straight into my skin. When she left her phone in the kitchen, I quietly took a screenshot. Messages with friends, plans to deal with mother-in-law discussed as if I was not human. Sophia was not only greedy, she also turned Dylan into a tool to spend freely, to live a luxurious life on the backs of others. I returned to my room and sat quietly by the window, looking out into the backyard. The rose bushes Sophia had planted were in full bloom, proudly standing in the golden sunlight. But to me, they were just a disguise for the thorns. Beautiful on the outside, cruel on the inside. Sophia had shown her true colors. She was no longer a daughter-in-law, but a clear villain. And I would not stand by. I began to plan in detail, texting Beatrice on a private account, collecting receipts, screenshots, every piece of evidence. I watched Sophia all the time, making smoothies, watching movies, making phone calls in the hallway. The sarcasm, the contemptuous looks, the deliberate destruction of my belongings, all of it was as clear as a film. I was no longer afraid. She was now the target, and I would strike when the time came. Every night when the house was silent, I lay in bed, going over the details. Sophia thought I was old and weak, but she had misjudged me. I would make her pay, not for myself, but for the trampled justice. Dylan was still blind, but he would have to face the truth. This house was no longer a home, it was a battlefield, and I was ready to go to war. That evening, the air in the house was thick as an invisible fog, thick with stifling silence. Only the sound of knives and forks lightly touching the fine china plates rang out, cold and lonely, like a sound coming from a distant world. We sat around the dining table under the pale yellow light of a sparkling crystal chandelier, which Sophia often boasted was imported from Europe. But to me, that light did not bring any warmth. It only increased the coldness that was gradually seeping into my skin. The main dish was grilled beef steak with organic salad ordered from a nearby restaurant, not something I had prepared myself like before. After being rejected so many times, I had learned to retreat so as not to see that hateful gaze. Dylan sat at the head of the table, looking tired after a long day, his eyes occasionally glued to the screen of his phone, as if deliberately ignoring my presence. Sophia sat opposite, wearing bright red lipstick and a tight dress as if she was hosting a lavish party just for her. I struggled to keep my composure, picking at my salad with my fork mindlessly, but the silence didn't last long. Sophia broke it with her familiar, cold, meaningful voice. "Mom, I've been thinking, you should find some part-time work. You're still healthy, and it's boring to stay home," she said, her eyes sweeping over me as if she were assessing an item about to be thrown away. I knew full well that her concern was a facade. The words were a clever way to push me further away, to fend for myself and stop being a burden to them. Or maybe, worse, to make money and then have it taken away, like the money I'd quietly noticed disappearing from my account. My fingers tightened around the fork under the table, the cold metal digging into my palm, but my voice remained calm as I spoke. "Mom, I think I'm retired, Sophia. I'm not young enough to work anymore." Sophia smirked, her crooked smile revealing her white teeth under the flickering candlelight, like a carnivore suddenly interested in its prey. "If you're still mentally sharp after retirement, you can still do it. You can be a tutor or sell things online. I see many old ladies making a lot of money on TikTok." She glanced at Dylan as if she wanted to pull him to her side, adding weight to her sarcastic words. "Dylan is busy working to support the whole family. You should share the responsibility. Don't let him carry it all." Every word she uttered was like a knife to my heart, cold and cruel, making old wounds that hadn't had time to heal bleed. Not only was she insulting her old age, Sophia also denied everything I had sacrificed, turning me into a lost, out-of-date person. I looked at Dylan, expecting a gesture, a word of defense, but he just lowered his head to eat, as if all those words had nothing to do with the person who gave birth to him. That silence, the silence of my own son, was more cruel than any harsh words. In that moment, I remembered Dylan as a child, the boy who would hold me when I was sad, who had promised to protect his mother for the rest of his life. But now that man had changed, swept away by a life of comfort and luxury with Sophia, forgetting the mother who had stayed up all night to take care of him when he had a high fever, who had worked hard to pay for his college tuition. I think you should reconsider. We can't keep supporting you like this, Sophia added, her voice sweet as honey but sharp as a knife. She had taken complete control, turning Dylan into a silent, soulless man. I felt a heat rise in my chest, spreading throughout my body, making my hands tremble. I wanted to stand up and slap that triumphant face, but I held back. I couldn't let myself be pushed to the limit. I needed to stay awake. I needed to be strong. Thank you for caring, Sophia, I replied, each word emphasized with all the coldness I could muster. I looked straight into her eyes, and in that moment, I saw a flash of confusion. She didn't expect me to be so calm, without tears, without pleading. But she didn't know that, within that silence, a fire was burning, burning away every fear I had ever carried. I wouldn't cry. I would remember every word, every look, etching it into my memory like the name of an enemy. Dinner continued in silence, broken only by the dry chewing and the clatter of knives and forks on plates. Finally, Dylan spoke, but it was a casual, "Eat, Mom. It's cold." Not protective, not sharing. Just a hollow statement, making my heart feel colder. I finished my last bite, stood up to quietly clean up, and returned to my room. That night, lying in bed, I closed my eyes but could not sleep. Sophia's every word, like a sharp knife, still echoed in my head. She wanted me to go to work as if I had never lived for others, as if I were a useless parasite. But the most painful thing was Dylan. His silence broke my heart, like an abandoned child. I wondered if my son still had any feelings, or if it had all been wiped out by sweet words and flashy parties. I sat up, looked out the window. The thick darkness seemed to swallow up all hope. In that darkness, my anger grew. Not an explosive anger, but the slow burn of someone who had endured too much. I picked up the phone and quietly texted Beatrice. "I need advice. Things are worse than I thought." She replied immediately. "Meet me at the old place tomorrow. Don't let anyone know." The next morning, I lied and said I wanted to go for a walk. The daily grind was a small refuge from the chaos. Beatrice sat there, herbal tea in hand, her eyes as bright and sharp as ever. I told her everything, every insult, every missing amount of money. She listened silently, then squeezed my hand and whispered, "Evelyn, you're not being insulted. You're being manipulated. You need proof, and don't let them know you're awake." Those words were a powerful medicine, steadying me. When I returned, I found Sophia giggling on the phone, still in her silk nightgown, scrolling through her shopping cart. She looked up. "Where have you been, Mom? I hope you've thought about what I said last night." I looked at her, my lips curving into a faint smile. "You're thinking about it?" Little did she know, those words only made me sharper, ready to cut through everything. In the days that followed, I watched quietly, taking careful notes. Every conversation with Sophia was a chess game, but I was no longer the one being backed into a corner. I was preparing for a counterattack, and this time, I would be the one to finish it. It was late at night. My small bedroom was plunged into pitch darkness, but sleep still eluded me like a traitor. The wind whistled through the thin window, carrying with it a chill and gloomy whispers, as if the wind was also reproaching my lonely existence. The faint light from the distant street lamp cast a hazy light on the lifeless white walls, and the old wardrobe, the silent witness of a lifetime of memories, was now just an empty shell. I closed my eyes, trying to find some peace, but my mind was drowned in tattered memories, Like a sad song that kept repeating itself endlessly, Sophia's cold words at dinner, Dylan's indifferent glances, all were like knives carving deep into my heart. I asked myself, why was I so gullible? How could I pour out my heart only to receive oblivion? I sacrificed my youth to raise Dylan, gave up my dream of becoming a teacher to work as a secretary, saving every penny so that my son could have a bright future. I spent countless sleepless nights by his bedside, countless days working hard to pay for his college tuition, and now it all seemed to have turned to dust. Tears welled up, hot, salty, and silent. I felt like a deserted island in the middle of an endless ocean. No lights, no distress signals. No one was on my side anymore. Dylan had been completely controlled by Sophia, turned into a stranger to the point that I could no longer recognize the eyes I once loved. I was just a burden, a useless old woman in their eyes. What should I do? I whispered in the pitch black, my voice echoing back, sounding as strange as an echo from a stranger. I can't live like this. I thought about leaving what had been a home, but now felt like a cold stone cage. But where would I go? I didn't have enough savings to rent another place. I had no close friends to rely on. My meager pension was barely enough to get by, and even that, I felt like Sophia was draining me bit by bit. The thought of death flashed past me like a cruel shadow, making me shudder. Should I end it all to free myself from this pain? But no, I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let Sophia thrive on my pain. I couldn't let Dylan forever remain unaware of his sins. Inside me was an inner storm, a silent battle between two extremes tearing at my soul. Part of me wanted to give up, accept my old age, accept that I had exhausted my strength to fight against the cruel life. That voice reminded me of losses, the death of my husband, the years of loneliness, and now the cold betrayal from the person I loved the most. But another part, more fierce, rising from the bottom of my heart. The anger I had suppressed now flared up fiercely. It burned my fears, awakened the desire to live properly, to stand up. I remembered Beatrice, my old neighbor, a strong woman who had gone through the pain of loss and loneliness. I remembered her saying through the rotten wooden fence, "Never let others trample on you, Evelyn. Fight for what you deserve." At that time, I only smiled sadly, but now, those words were like a small light flickering in the dark, guiding me out of the abyss. I took a deep breath, wiping away the tears with a shaking hand. No, I would not cry anymore. I would not let the pain break me. I needed a plan. I had to get it all back. My money, my dignity, my stolen self-respect. The first thing was the finances. I would review all transactions, contact my bank to protect my accounts. I would contact Beatrice more, find out about legal help, learn how to cope and protect myself. But most importantly, I had to regain Dylan's respect, make Sophia pay for her greed and cruelty. Dylan would not escape the consequences of silence and indifference. Without real change, I would never forgive. I sat up, looked out of the window where the wind still whistled through the cracks, carrying the scent of rain to come. The sky was black, but inside me, a spark burned. I was no longer the fragile Evelyn. I am a woman who has been through hell, and I will come out stronger from it. In the days that followed, the conflict in my heart was still there, like two waves crashing against each other. But I began to take action, even if it was just small steps. During the day, I still played the role of a gentle mother, cleaning and holding back, avoiding contact with Sophia. But at night, in this room, I recorded every detail: the insults, the money that disappeared, the hidden manipulations. I wondered if I was becoming too cold. Did I still love Dylan like before? A part of my heart was still weak, still missing the boy Dylan from years ago, with his innocent smile and his little hugs. But then the image of him, silent, indifferent to his wife's harsh words, reappeared, extinguishing all hesitation. No, I had to save myself. No one else would do it. Beatrice became my support. The secret calls were like a medicine to revive my spirit. She told me about her journey of breaking away from her selfish son to live her own life. You are not alone, Evelyn. There are many women like us who have done it, she said, her voice warm as a hug on a cold night. Then I realized this crisis was not just the abyss, but also the beginning of a new life. I started reading the psychology and finance books that Beatrice sent me in the mail, learning to recognize manipulation, learning how to protect myself. The wind whistling through the window at night was no longer a threat, but a wake-up call, a reminder that I still had strength. I still cried, but less, and each tear now fueled the fire of determination. I would not let the pain define me. I would turn it into a weapon. And when the first light of dawn broke through the glass, I woke up, not just to live another day, but to fight, gather evidence, seek help, prepare for a battle that I knew would be hard, but necessary. The crisis inside me was still there, but I chose to stand up, and nothing could drag me back to the abyss. After long nights of torment, when each thought was like a cold needle piercing my mind, I knew I could no longer sit still, waiting for Dylan or Sophia to change. My silence only gave them more strength. I needed to rise up, to understand, to fight against the siege that was tightening around me. That morning, I left home under the pretext of going for a walk, but in reality, I was headed to the Willow Creek Central Library, an old building with high ceilings, bookshelves that reached close to the roof, the faint scent of old paper, like the smell of memories, and the gentle sound of pages turning in the quiet space. I did not come to be entertained, not to find the peaceful novels that had once calmed my heart. I came to learn, to equip myself with the necessary tools for the silent war. I quietly walked between the shelves of books on finance, law, and signs of fraud, topics that I had previously thought were foreign to a woman like me. Thick titles like Managing Personal Finances in the Digital Age and Protecting Consumers from Bank Fraud were held close to my chest as if they were the only shield I had. I sat down, flipped through the pages, and took careful notes in an old notebook. I learned how to track bank transactions, distinguish real signatures from fake ones, and the legal steps to protect my personal rights. Each line was like a lamp lit in the dark night of doubt, proving that I was not as useless as Sophia had mocked. I just lacked knowledge, and now I was slowly gaining it. I sat there for hours under the flickering fluorescent lights, intently recording every detail. How to look up your transaction history online, how to request a statement without being caught, the financial telltale signs that someone was quietly draining you. At night, when the house was as silent as a frozen statue, I opened my tablet and checked each payment in my account. I wrote down the date, the amount, the recipient's name, names like Sophie's Boutique or expensive designer stores I'd never been to. These payments weren't random, they had a pattern, a trace, a web of meticulous manipulation. I felt myself changing, no longer a trembling old woman, but a dogged observer, a silent hunter in the dark. There were no tears now, only a cold, sober look. One weekend afternoon, after leaving the library with my head bursting with information, I met Beatrice at The Daily Grind, a small cafe in the center of town where the aroma of roasted coffee and soft jazz played from old speakers. The space was warm and private enough to hold a heavy conversation. I arrived early, chose a table in the most secluded corner, and clenched my cup of hot black coffee, trying to calm my pounding heart. Beatrice appeared soon after, elegant, neatly gray hair, a gentle face, but eyes that seemed to cut through all lies. She was an accountant, retired, but her mind was still as sharp as a knife. "Hello, Evelyn. You look more tired than last time," she said, sitting down and sipping herbal tea. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, trying to keep my voice even despite the storm raging inside me. "I need your help. Things are worse than I thought." I told her everything. Sophia's sarcastic sarcasm, the way she demanded living expenses as if I were her hired hand, the secret withdrawals that I had only discovered through readings and secret research, and the biggest pain of all, my own son's cold indifference. I handed Beatrice a list of suspicious transactions, written in my own shaky but determined handwriting. Each number was a stab, silent, precise, unforgiving. Beatrice read it, her face darkening, her eyes sharpening. "Evelyn, this isn't just about money. This is systematic manipulation. And you did the right thing by taking notes. But we're going to need more than that. What should I do next?" I asked, my voice trembling, but my eyes no longer broken. She took my hand, warm and steady. I almost cried. "You need to record every conversation that's threatening or coercive. Hide your phone in your pocket. Take pictures of receipts. Keep anything that can prove Sophia is taking advantage of you. And you need someone with financial expertise to review all the transactions. I know someone I can trust." She mentioned Harold Jenkins, a retired financial expert who had worked at a regional bank. I immediately called him and made an appointment to meet him the next day, saying I was visiting an old friend. Dylan and Sophia didn't bother to ask where I was going. Mr. Jenkins's office was on the edge of town, a small, tidy room with a dark wood desk, a large computer monitor, and stacks of financial documents as neat as a wall. He greeted me with a kind smile, poured me hot tea, and sat quietly examining each document I'd brought. Handwritten notes, printouts from the library, screenshots from my banking app. His face grew serious, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose as he leaned closer to a line of text. "Miss Evelyn, it appears you've been scammed. Very sophisticated," he said, his voice low. "Large sums of money have been transferred without your consent. And here," he pointed to a line on the statement that I hadn't noticed before, "a $150,000 home mortgage in Dylan's name, but the signature was forged. Most likely Sophia." My heart stopped. A chill ran through my skin like summer ice. $150,000? That was a lot of money. It could have been the fancy car Sophia bragged about online, or something I could never dream of. She wasn't just taking my money. She dragged Dylan into a debt trap, making my son a pawn in her game. I gripped the arms of my chair, struggling to breathe. "Are you sure? How could she do that?" He nodded, his voice heavy. "With access to the account, some knowledge of digital signatures, and Dylan's negligence, it's possible." He paused, looking at me with a serious expression. "This is a crime, Evelyn. We should report it to the bank, and maybe the police. But first, I'll help you gather more solid evidence." That afternoon, I returned home with a heavy head, but a strange determination in my heart. The house was the same. Sophia in the living room, eyes glued to the TV, Dylan still not home. But I was different. I was no longer the old woman who sat crying in her small room. I had learned to be quiet, to observe, to act in the shadows. My meetings with Beatrice and Mr. Jenkins had given me courage, turned me into a patient predator waiting for prey to fall into my trap. I would not let them continue to trample me. I would take back what was mine and what they thought they had taken. That night, as I lay in bed, strangely quiet, I was no longer afraid. I had a plan: record my conversation with Sophia and call Mr. Jenkins back to begin the next step. Not the end, but the beginning of the counterattack. After days of digging through the files, quietly gathering evidence with the dedicated help of Beatrice and Mr. Jenkins, I felt a transformation within me. I was no longer the old woman who trembled at the sarcasm and contemptuous looks. The anger inside me was no longer a small, flickering spark. It had turned into a raging, fierce, and intense fire, urging me to act. I held a thick envelope in my hand. Inside was all the truth: detailed bank statements down to every transaction, lavish bills in Sophia's name that I had secretly photographed, and most of all, a copy of the forged mortgage contract bearing Dylan's signature. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from excitement. But my eyes were firm and determined. This was the moment of truth, the moment I made the first move to regain justice. That evening, the house seemed to carry a strange weight. The sound of the TV from the living room overwhelmed the silence, and the smell of cold, fast food still lingered on the table that no one had bothered to clean. I walked into the living room, where Dylan and Sophia were leaning against each other like a carefree couple. Sophia was sprawled on the sofa, her legs propped up in Dylan's lap, giggling at a loud TV show. Dylan was engrossed in the remote, occasionally glancing down at his phone, unconcerned. They seemed to be living in a perfect world, unaware that reality was about to collapse. Dylan, Sophia, I have something to tell you, I said, my voice not shaky like before, but firm, cutting through their laughter like a knife. They turned to look at me, slightly annoyed, then shocked when they saw the envelope I was holding. "What is it, Mom?" Dylan asked, his voice indifferent, his eyes never quite leaving the screen. I walked over and placed the envelope on the gleaming glass coffee table. Though my hands were shaking, I tried to maintain my composure, as if each move had been calculated. "Here's everything I've collected. Proof that you stole my money, Sophia. And here," I said, pointing to the copy of the contract Mr. Jenkins had helped me get from the bank, "is the loan document for $150,000 in Dylan's name with his forged signature." The room froze. The sound of the television was still playing, but it was distant and meaningless. Sophia jumped up, her face pale, her eyes wide as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Mom, what are you talking about? Are you delusional? Is this a joke?" Her voice was shaking, a forced smile distorting her pale face. Dylan finally put down the remote and picked up the contract with trembling hands. He scanned the words, his eyes shifting from surprise to suspicion to anger. "What is this, Sophia? A $150,000 loan? I've never signed anything like this." For the first time, I saw Dylan actually angry with his wife. Sophia lunged forward to snatch the envelope back, her face contorted with fear. Don't, don't trust her. She's old. She's senile. This is a misunderstanding, Dylan." But he pushed her hand away, his eyes fixed on her with growing suspicion. "No, Dylan, it's the truth." I replied coldly, my voice losing all its strength. "Sophia lied to you and to me. She spent my money, Louis Vuitton bags, expensive jewelry, things she showed off to her friends as if they were the result of her own labor. Worse, she borrowed money from the bank in your name, dragging you into a huge debt." Mr. Jenkins confirmed it all. I read each piece of evidence as if I were reading an indictment, my eyes never leaving Sophia. She backed away, her face drained of color, trying to salvage her last shred of credibility. "Don't you trust me, Dylan? Do you trust this old woman? She's jealous of us, don't you see? She wants to destroy her happiness." Dylan suddenly stood up. His eyes were fixed on his wife, furious as ever. "Tell me the truth, Sophia. What did you do with Mom's money? Do you think I'm so blind that I don't realize?" He grabbed her wrist, his voice harsh. "Let go. You're hurting me." Sophia screamed, struggling in panic, her blonde hair in disarray. In an unconscious struggle, Dylan accidentally pushed. Sophia staggered, falling against the coffee table, her arms flailing for support. Dylan backed away reflexively and bumped into me, causing me to lose my balance and fall backwards onto the floor. My head hit the sharp corner of the wooden table. A searing pain tore through my temple. Blood began to ooze, hot and heavy, blurring my vision. I lay motionless, the blood from my temple seeping into the polished wood floor, forming a dark red pool. "Mom, are you okay?" Dylan screamed, falling to his knees beside me, panicked. He tried to lift my head, but my eyes were on him, cold and disappointed. He had abandoned me for so long, and now, in a moment of defending a liar, he had accidentally hurt me. "You crazy? You evil woman!" Sophia shouted from behind, pointing at me, her face twisted with anger and fear. "See? She's acting. Call the police. Get her out of the house." Dylan looked at me, then at Sophia. His eyes were full of confusion and fear. "Mom, try to get up," he whispered, wiping the blood from my cheek with a shaking hand. But I couldn't. My head was pounding, the pain was making me dizzy, and I had no strength to get up. I looked at him and Sophia as if I were looking at two strangers, a bottomless greedy man and a weakling with no opinions. "Get out of my house!" Sophia screamed again, her voice shrill and fierce. "Get out! This isn't your place anymore! Dylan, say something!" But Dylan said nothing. He just stood there, his eyes averted, leaving me on the floor, bleeding. He didn't come to my defense, didn't try to stop Sophia. She had completely taken control of him. Even as the truth was laid bare before him, he hesitated. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered, my voice weak but still strong, trying to sit up. "This is my home, and I won't let you two walk all over me anymore." But the pain was so intense that I collapsed again, my vision darkening. Dylan finally called an ambulance, his voice slurring. But I knew everything had changed. I couldn't stay here. I'd lost too much, my faith, my home, and now my health. But I wouldn't let them win. This fight was just beginning, and I was going to fight back, starting from my hospital bed with Beatrice and Mr. Jenkins by my side. The ambulance roared into the night, siren blaring. The paramedics lifted me onto a stretcher, bandaged my wounds, and took me away, while Sophia stood there, worried, calculating, triumphant. Dylan followed, but he didn't say a word the whole way. I lay there, dried blood on my cheeks, my head spinning, but my heart clearer than ever. The first blow had spilled blood, but I wouldn't back down. I would stand up, and I would make them pay. I lay motionless on the white bed at Willow Creek Hospital, my head wrapped in bandages, every muscle in my body groaning from the violent impact at home. The external injuries were minor, a mild concussion and a few stitches to my scalp, but the wounds to my soul were deep, festering, and unfixable with stitches or painkillers. The room was cold, with the pungent smell of antiseptic, and the steady beat of the heart monitor beat like the ticking of time in a lonely world. Dylan hadn't come, though he'd called the ambulance. Sophia hadn't shown up either, probably preoccupied with the aftermath of her outburst. I lay alone, staring at the white ceiling, thinking about the confrontation. The first shot I'd fired had drawn blood, but also revealed an unexpected truth. A young nurse pushed open the door, a medicine cart rolling softly across the tile. "Mrs. Hayes, there's someone to see you," she said, her voice soft as morning dew. I nodded, half hoping it was Dylan, but then Beatrice appeared, her face etched with worry, a small bouquet of flowers and a time-worn handbag in her hands. She sat down by the bed, taking my hand in a gentle squeeze. "Evelyn, how are you? I heard from Mr. Jenkins. He's worried." Her voice was warm and silky, like cool water to a parched thirst. "I'm fine, Beatrice, but they sent me away. Now I have nowhere to go." I told her everything, the chaotic confrontation, Sophia's panicked gaze, Dylan's faith-killing hesitation, the painful fall, and the cruel silence of my beloved child. Beatrice listened, her eyes glistening, but when she wiped away a tear, she became resolute. I know, Mr. Jenkins has been in touch. He also asked me to bring you some more important papers. She handed me a thick, heavy envelope that seemed to hold my entire fate. My hands shook as I opened it. In the dim hospital light, it was a copy of Sophia and Dylan's financial records obtained by Mr. Jenkins from the bank under his legal authority. Inside, the evidence was undeniable. Sophia had withdrawn tens of thousands of dollars from my account, not just a few thousand, as I had thought. Even more alarming was an internal letter from the bank revealing that Sophia had forged Dylan's signature to obtain a loan of up to $150,000. But the real twist was the intended use. The money wasn't for her usual personal expenses, but to fund a high-end fashion chain called Sophia's Chic Boutique, a secret business venture that was on the brink of bankruptcy, racking up debts from rent to suppliers. Sophia tried to cover up the failure with a fake loan, and now the bank is about to repossess Dylan's assets, including the house on Elm Street. I read each line, each word like a stab to the chest. She used the money to start her own business, and now it's failed miserably, I whispered, my throat dry from the accident. Beatrice nodded, her eyes serious. Yes, Mr. Jenkins investigated further and found that Sophia was carrying over $200,000 in debt from other loans. The bank had already sent a foreclosure notice to Dylan, but he may not have known. Sophia had borrowed money in his name, and now she may be trying to escape or to shift the blame. A chill ran down my spine, as if my world had come crashing down all over again. Sophia wasn't just greedy, she was a calculating criminal, ensnaring both me and my husband. Dylan, my son, my hope, was now a victim. But all these months, he had chosen to stand by her side, leaving me to fall. This betrayal was deeper than anything I had ever imagined. It was more than just money, but a sophisticated and vicious web of lies. I lay there, my mind reeling, as Beatrice held my hand. "I'll call the police," I said, my voice hoarse but determined. Beatrice looked at me, her eyes a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure, Evelyn? This could have a huge impact on Dylan. He could lose his job, his house, and even face legal action if the bank prosecutes him." I was silent for a long time, my heart aching as I thought about Dylan, the kid who used to cling to my leg every day I went to school, now a stranger. I had given him so many chances, but he had stood silently behind Sophia. "I'm sure," I said, my voice as hard as steel. "I gave Dylan everything. He chose to betray. Now he has to take responsibility for that choice." Beatrice nodded, then helped me grab the phone from the table. I dialed the police, detailing the details in a calm but firm voice, from the financial abuse to the fraudulent loan, along with the documents Mr. Jenkins had provided. They promised to send someone out immediately to take a statement and begin an investigation. When I hung up, I lay down, exhausted but relieved. This twist didn't kill me. It was the spark that ignited a fire of determination. From this hospital bed, I would launch my counterattack, contacting Beatrice's proposed attorney, preparing my case, and working closely with Mr. Jenkins. Dylan might come after he got the letter from the bank, but by then, it would be too late. I wouldn't forgive them. I wouldn't let them get away. I would make them both pay. And from the ashes, I would rise, stronger than ever. The days that followed passed like drops of water on ice. Nurses came to change bandages and check wounds, and Beatrice visited every day, bringing fruit and old novels. I used the time to make a detailed plan, to ask Mr. Jenkins to send more documents, to take notes, to prepare for the trial. News of the debt began to leak out. Beatrice told me that the bank had sent a warning letter to Dylan's house. Sophia was probably panicking, trying to salvage what was left, but the web of lies she had built was crumbling. I looked out the hospital window, where the afternoon light fell like a curtain of hope. That shock was the final push. I had nothing to lose, but every reason to stand up. I would not stop until justice was done. The lawsuit exploded like a bolt from the blue, spreading rapidly through Willow Creek and blowing away the placid mask that had enveloped this small town. The news of a 75-year-old mother suing her son and daughter-in-law for property fraud became a sensation, from the coffee shop, The Daily Grind, where I had sat with Beatrice, to the lively chat groups on local social media. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved in with Beatrice in a cozy little house in the suburbs, where the backyard was filled with flowers and birds chirped softly every morning. But I couldn't sit still in the gentleness. With the help of Mr. Jenkins and the lawyer Beatrice recommended, Thomas Reed, a shrewd middle-aged man who had handled a series of family property fraud cases, I filed a formal lawsuit. The thick file was indisputable. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, receipts for Sophia's lavish purchases, and a fake mortgage signed by Dylan. The bank got involved too, sending out foreclosure notices for $150,000, pushing everything to breaking point. The first hearing took place in Willow Creek's old county courthouse, with its dark wood paneling and cold, rigid benches. I sat in the plaintiff's row wearing a simple but pressed dress, clutching a briefcase full of documents. Mr. Reed stood next to me, his voice resonant in the quiet space as he stated, Ms. Evelyn Hayes was the victim of a systematic financial exploitation by Sophia Miller and Dylan Hayes. Not only did the defendant drain her meager pension, but he also forged her signature to take out massive debts, putting her family on the brink of bankruptcy. I looked across the table. Sophia sat next to the lawyer, a young woman who struggled to maintain her composure despite her pale complexion. Her voice trembled as she protested, I did nothing wrong. She's senile. She transferred the money herself because she loved her daughter-in-law. It was just a family misunderstanding. But each piece of evidence was like a needle stabbing into the truth. Mr. Jenkins took the stand and gave a detailed account of the fraudulent transactions, leaving the judge pensive and taking notes. Dylan sat silently beside Sophia, his head bowed, not daring to look at me once. There was belated regret in his eyes, something heavy and blurred, but he remained silent, not saying a word to defend me, only shaking his head every time Sophia's lawyer tried to defend me. Ms. Evelyn Hayes, could this be a misunderstanding? Sophia's lawyer asked as I stepped onto the witness stand, her voice soft but containing a sharp snare. I looked straight into her eyes, my voice resounding decisively in the silent room. I am certain every dollar, every signature forged, was done by Sophia Miller. She took advantage of my trust and my son's to serve her lavish lifestyle, pushing us to the brink. My words fell heavily like a sentence. Sophia bowed her head, her face pale, and Dylan clenched his trembling hands. I recount the months of humiliation, of being stripped bare, of Dylan's cruel silence, not to mourn, but to show that this was not just a material loss, but the destruction of a family at its roots. The trial lasted several days, with additional evidence from the bank and testimony from Beatrice, who told of my nights of whispering and despair, of my silent transformation. Then the verdict was delivered. Sophia was convicted of financial fraud, ordered to pay back the stolen money, more than $50,000, and given a suspended sentence for forgery. Dylan, though not directly involved in the fraud, was found to be an indirect accomplice through indifference and was held partially liable for the debt. But the hardest blow came from the bank. Just a day after the verdict, I received news that Dylan and Sophia's house was being foreclosed on to recover a $150,000 loan. The chain of stores, Sophia's Chic Boutique, was closed. Its assets were seized due to mounting debts. Sophia was left with nothing, both the glamorous lifestyle and the model wife persona she had built. Beatrice said that after the trial, she had a huge argument with Dylan, venting her anger at him for not keeping track of her finances, then fled town without a word. Dylan was left alone in the ruins. No wife, no home, no job. The scandal spread and the construction company where he worked fired him for moral turpitude. One rainy night, as I sat by Beatrice's window, watching the raindrops patter against the glass, the phone rang. Dylan's voice choked through the speaker. Mom, Mom, Sophia left. The house is gone. I have nothing left. Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I listened to him cry silently, but there was no more pain in my heart, just a vast, cold, gray space. He told of nights spent wandering in cheap hotels, friends turning their backs on him, jobs lost. Mom, I was stupid. I let Sophia fool both you and me. Please let me come back. I will make things right. I clutched the phone in my hand, memories flooding back. Nights crying alone in the cold room, Sophia's insults, Dylan's indifference when I needed him most. I had given him countless chances, from warm meals to silent pleading eyes. But he had chosen Sophia, chosen comfort over motherhood. I did it. I suffered, I said, my voice steady and cold, no longer trembling. I chose Sophia over you. I let her trample you, trample your dignity. Now I have to live with the consequences. You lost me a long time ago. Dylan sobbed on the other end of the line, his voice full of despair. Mom, please, I don't want to lose you forever. But I didn't budge. I hung up, leaving him to the sound of the rain and the loneliness he had once thrown me into. My family, the seemingly impregnable fortress of blood ties, had collapsed. Sophia was gone. Dylan was lost in poverty, and I, despite winning the lawsuit and recovering some of my assets, was still scarred. But I had no regrets. The lawsuit was not only a demand for justice, but also the key to freeing me from the shackles of blind love. Beatrice hugged me after that call, whispering, Evelyn, you are strong. This is the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I nodded, looking out. The rain had stopped. The sky was brightening. The villainous allies had fallen, but I was still standing here, steadfast, ready to continue on my own path. After the lawsuit and the complete breakdown of my family, I moved into Beatrice's small house in the quiet suburb of Willow Creek. The house was a forgotten piece of the world, gentle, quiet, and full of memories, in stark contrast to the oppressive coldness of the luxurious house on Elm Street that had once been called my home. It was a modest two-story wooden house, but inside was a living space filled with love, a living room filled with books, a kitchenette filled with the warm scent of cinnamon rolls, and a lush backyard where wildflowers grew proudly under Beatrice's loving care. She welcomed me with sympathetic silence, no questions, no judgment, making the small house the last safe haven for a woman who had just lost everything. I would sit for hours in my old armchair, where the afternoon light filtered through the trees outside the window, casting dappled shadows on the wooden floor like memories. Birds chirped from the backyard, but my heart was heavy, unable to reach that peace. I had won, legally, financially, but the price was my only son and the home that had been my reason for living. I would caress the old scarf, the only thing left after the storm named Sophia, and let the painful memories flood back scene by scene, like a slow-motion movie without end. Sophia's cruel words still echoed, countryside, debt, backward, each word like a sharp knife cutting into the exhausted trust. I remembered the mornings when I woke up early, trying to cook a decent meal to reconnect the broken family bond, only to receive contemptuous looks or humiliating silence from Dylan. My son, the one I had held and cared for since I was a baby, had turned his back, leaving me to fall to the bottom of a hell paved with betrayal. I became a pale shadow in that house, an old figure trampled by indifference and calculation. The nights when I cried in the dark, burying my face in the pillow to stifle my sobs, just hoping that Dylan would come in to comfort me. But he never did. I used to believe that I would never make it, that life would be nothing but a series of lonely and humiliating days. But I did. I stood up for the first time in decades of pleasing others. With the quiet but steady support of Beatrice and Mr. Jenkins, I gathered every piece of evidence, every hint of wrongdoing, every lie, and bravely brought it all to justice. Sophia paid the price, losing her fortune, her stores collapsing, and eventually disappearing from town as a failure. Dylan fell into the abyss of poverty, losing his home, his job, and the wife he had blindly protected. I forced them to face the consequences of their own actions. I remember standing in the dock, my voice unwavering, my eyes unblinking. Sophia was pale. Dylan bowed his head as if he had never realized that his silent mother could stand so firm. That was the moment I found the strength that had been dormant within me, no longer the submissive Evelyn, but the unyielding Evelyn. A part of me, during those long nights of tears, had imagined myself as a vengeful demon, and that day I became exactly that. My anger was no longer resentment, but the strength to protect my self-esteem that had been trampled for too long. However, that victory did not bring the radiant joy I had hoped for. Instead, it was a deep sadness, seeping into every breath, like a thick fog that refused to dissipate. I had regained justice, but I had also lost Dylan, my only son, a mother's last fragile hope of not being alone in old age. The bond between us had been severed, so severe that it could not be mended. I remember the last phone call, Dylan's choked voice. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong." And I refused, not because of hatred, but because I could not deceive my heart that the pain would disappear if I forgave. Every time I remembered, tears still fell silently. I looked at my old hands, the hands that had fed Dylan spoonfuls of porridge when he was a child, now soaked in the blood of resistance. It was the blood from the wound on my head after falling in the middle of the kitchen, the tears that flowed like rivers every lonely night. All of them created a memory that could not be named. I had devoted my whole life to my family, but in the end, I became a sacrifice to greed and indifference. Beatrice entered the room holding a cup of hot chamomile-scented tea and placed it gently on the table beside me. She sat down in the chair opposite me, holding my hand, the warm grip my mother had when I was a child. "Evelyn, can't you sleep? You look tired today." I looked at her, my voice choked up. "I can't sleep, Beatrice. I did what I had to do. I fought and won, but I lost my son." Beatrice squeezed my hand gently, her eyes kind but not weak. "You were strong, Evelyn. You defended yourself, reclaimed an honor that no one should have been allowed to trample on. Dylan chose that path, and you can't bear the consequences for him forever." Those words hit me like a truth I had long avoided. I had lived for others for too long, for my husband, for my children, and even for someone like Sophia. Now it was time for me to learn to live for myself. I have come too far to turn back, cross the bitter desert to find the source of my inner strength. I stood up and walked to the window, where the night was covering the back garden with a cold blanket of moonlight. The silvery light fell on the bushes Beatrice tended, reminding me of those long nights in Dylan's house, where I had sworn to seek justice. My heart was still broken, still aching when I thought about the past. But I knew that pain would go away. I would not let it define me. I would use this victory to start over. A new life, without dependence, without compromise, without bowing down. Beatrice and Mr. Jenkins had become a real family, not because of blood, but because they were there when I needed them most. I would live for myself, maybe join the local book club, or even take up a part-time job, not because someone said I needed a job, but because I wanted to. Life is not always fair, but I have learned that it is in the depths of vulnerability that people find the strength to stand up. Tears still fell, but now they were no longer tears of humiliation, but of relief. I gently wiped them away, took a deep breath of the cool night air, and felt the first relief after so many heavy months. I had lost so much, but in return, I had found myself, and that was the most worthy victory of my life. A few months after the lawsuit and the ultimate breakdown, I left Willow Creek, my heart broken, and moved to Maplewood, a small town about an hour's drive away. Beatrice and I rented a modest cabin on the edge of town, with a backyard shaded by old oak trees, covered in wildflowers, and an old swing that creaked in the wind. Life there was quiet and peaceful, a far cry from the hell I'd experienced in Dylan's house, with Sophia's mocking laughter and my own son's cruel silence. I began to adapt, cooking simple meals for two, borrowing books from the town library, even joining a group of older women to reminisce about the years. Beatrice was a warm refuge, patiently listening as I untangled my painful memories without judgment. But even though my new life is easier, the wound inside me is still there, not bleeding, but aching, burning like a cut that has never healed. Many nights I sit quietly by the window, my eyes watching the empty street, my heart silently remembering what I have lost. That rainy afternoon, while sitting in a small coffee shop called Maple Brew in the center of town, the phone suddenly rang. The shop was empty, only a few customers sitting reading newspapers, working on laptops. The smell of roasted coffee mixed with the sound of rain pattering on the porch roof made the space strangely quiet. I looked down at the screen. Dylan's number appeared. My heart clenched. This was the first time he had called since the lawsuit, since the last time I refused to forgive him on the phone in Beatrice's kitchen. I hesitated, my fingers slowly sliding across the screen, debating whether to listen or not. Finally, I picked up. My voice was calm but cold. "Hello." "Mom." Dylan's voice was hoarse, choked with tears. "Are you okay? I'm I'm sorry. I found your number from Beatrice. She didn't want to give it to me, but I begged." I didn't respond, letting him continue, my hands gripping the hot cup of coffee to keep my composure. "Mom, I was wrong. I was stupid. I let Sophia lie to us both. She, she left, leaving me in debt. The bank took the house. The company fired me after the scandal. Now I live in a shitty apartment in Willow Creek, eating instant noodles. I have nothing left, Mom. I miss you." Each word was like a dull knife cutting into the same place in my heart, a wound that had once bled, now only a scar. I stopped crying. I heard my son sobbing on the phone, choked, heartbroken sounds. A part of me, the motherly part that could not be extinguished, just wanted to hold him, comfort him, tell him that everything would be okay, like when he was a baby, fell off his bike, and I comforted him in my arms. But the other part, the part that had survived the storm of betrayal, would not let me forget. I remembered every breakfast I cooked and received a contemptuous look from Sophia every night I cried in my tiny room, while Dylan remained silent outside the door. I remembered the day Sophia asked for living expenses as a maid's salary. I remembered the bloody fall in the living room and the indifferent look of the child I had once placed all my trust in. He had chosen her, chosen ease over protecting the one who had given birth to him. "Dylan, you made a choice," I said, my voice calm, but each word felt like it was being stabbed into my flesh, into it, and into me. "You let Sophia trample on me, on all the sacrifices I made for you. I worked hard to send you to school, sold the house to pay for your father's medical bills. I moved in with you just to have a peaceful old age. but you kept quiet. You let me suffer the humiliation, the isolation. You didn't protect me, even if I only needed a word of defense. I paused to catch my breath. Outside, the rain fell harder, pounding against the glass as if urging me not to stop. I forgave you many times, Dylan. I cooked. I talked. I tried every way to hold on to the family. But you always chose Sophia. Now, when everything has collapsed, you come to me? Mom, I know I was wrong, Dylan pleaded, choking back tears. I was blinded. I thought she loved me, but she just used me. Now I've lost everything, my job, my friends, my self-confidence. Please, just one more chance. I'll change. I'll take care of you. Start over. Don't leave me. Those words made my heart flutter. Half of me saw my son again, calling me dear mom, smiling innocently. The other half saw him bowing his head to Sophia, leaving me lying motionless on the floor, blood soaking my hair. I looked out the window where raindrops rolled down. Like the thousands of tears I had silently shed, I had no more tears to cry. I'm still your mother, Dylan, I said, my voice as firm and resolute as ever. But I can't let you continue to trample on my life. I don't forgive, not because I don't love you anymore, but because I had to learn to love myself first. I've been through hell, and I've earned this little peace. Here with Beatrice, with the life I'm building. I don't want to go back. I'm scared, scared of being pushed back into the abyss by you again. Mom, his voice was a broken whisper. I pictured him sitting quietly in his shabby room, surrounded by bills and his own wreckage. But I was no longer weak. Bring yourself back from your mistakes, Dylan, I continued, my voice even. Learn to bounce back, like I did. I found my way, and I won't go back. Good luck. I hung up before he could reply, setting the phone down on the table with a still shaking hand. Outside, the rain was still falling, but no longer sad. Now the sound of the rain was like a cleansing song of the dark past. I sat silently, my eyes scanning the warm space of the cafe, with its sweet smell of toast and colorful paintings on the walls. I had said it all. I had closed a chapter of my life filled with sacrifice and hopeless love. I stood up, paid for my coffee, and walked out into the heavy rain. The cool drops of water on my skin did not make me cold. On the contrary, it made me feel alive. I would return to Beatrice, tell her about that phone call, and then cook dinner together and laugh loudly in the small kitchen. My life from now on was mine, no longer bound by the old pain I had faced, and I was free. I was sitting on the porch in Maplewood, an old book resting on my lap, but my eyes were lost in space, unable to read a single line. The afternoon sun filtered through the old oak leaves, casting pale yellow streaks on the wooden floor, and a breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers from the backyard drifted around me like a gentle whisper. The small house we rented was simple but cozy, the living room covered in books and Beatrice's own hand-painted paintings, the kitchenette smelling of herbal tea brewed every morning. Beatrice was bent over the rose bushes by the fence, a gentle smile on her tanned face, as if her old wounds were blooming with the season. My current life was a stark contrast to the suffocating months in Willow Creek. Thanks to Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Reed's persistent support, I had won back some of Sophia's money, about $50,000, enough to keep me alive without worrying about meals or utility bills. Beatrice and I lived together, sharing every little thing. A simple breakfast of fried eggs and toast, or long evenings sitting by the window, telling each other stories of life, books, and old dreams. We created a family, not related by blood, but strong by understanding and kindness, something that blood relatives may not have. I joined the town library's book club, where gray-haired women like me gathered every week to discuss old novels, the fates of characters, and, without realizing it, to open up about themselves. The first time I went, I felt hesitant, as reserved as a teenager, but then I realized I was no longer alone. The women, some widowed, some single after divorce, had all been through the same wounds as I had. They listened to my story without judgment or pity. "You're so strong, Evelyn," Margaret said gently, taking my hand when the meeting ended. "Not everyone can go through such pain." I smiled, feeling a warm glow inside me for the first time in months. I also bought a new tablet, learned how to use social media, not to show off like Sophia did, but to connect with old friends in the club, and sometimes to send a few photos of flowers in the garden with a short message. The kind responses from strangers made me feel that I was still present, still worthy of being seen. I discovered simple joys in the little things. An afternoon stroll around town, stopping by the Maple Brew Cafe for a latte, or simply sitting with Beatrice, listening to her recount her travels around Europe as a young woman. Dylan occasionally appears in my mind like a smudge of ink on a page of memory. I don't know where he is, how he's doing. Perhaps still in that dilapidated apartment in Willow Creek, struggling through each lonely day. I'm no longer angry with him, no longer harboring the same burning hatred as in the early days after the lawsuit. There's only a smoldering sadness, an indelible regret. I remember the boy Dylan running around the garden, smiling brightly and calling Mommy. Then that image gradually fades, replaced by the silent man sitting next to Sophia, turning a blind eye to my tears. The scar in my heart will probably never fully heal, but I've learned to accept it as a part of life. It was that pain that taught me that love, without fairness and respect, becomes a form of spiritual exploitation, a chain that locks the soul. One morning, I woke up early, made a pot of herbal tea, and sat at the kitchen table looking out at the misty garden. Beatrice walked in with her silver hair tied back in a bun, a wicker basket in her hand, a smile lighting up her face. "Let's go shopping today? I'm going to make your favorite chicken soup." I nodded, a sense of relief rising in my heart. Life is not a bed of roses. It is not exempt from pain. Sometimes it is the closest people who break us, but it is also in the darkness that people reveal their true strength, dare to stand up, dare to start over from the ruins. I learned a lesson that I had never thought of in my life. Love does not mean unconditional sacrifice. Sometimes you have to know how to say enough, to know how to let go to keep your own soul. Cutting off a toxic relationship is not a failure, but the bravest act I have ever done to protect the peace that remains. I stood up and prepared breakfast with Beatrice, the laughter of two middle-aged women echoing in the small kitchen. Outside, the world still turned as before, but I, Evelyn, was no longer the resigned woman of years ago. I had found my place, a place without fear, without love, a place to live, truly live, with people who cherished me. Unread books, untouched dawns. My journey continued, but now it began with a heart that had learned to heal itself. Life isn't always easy, is it? We often sacrifice too much for our loved ones, thinking that love will make up for everything. But sometimes that sacrifice becomes a burden, making us forget our own worth. In my story, I learned that being strong is not about not crying, but about standing up after tears. Remember, you deserve to be respected, to be loved fairly. If someone tramples on your dignity, don't be afraid to cut them off, because true peace lies in living for yourself. I went through hell, and you can too. Embrace that inner strength and walk steadily. And remember, you are never alone in this journey.